Before anyone found Elisa Lam, they found something wrong with the water. At first, it seemed like a normal hotel complaint. Guests at the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles started noticing the water pressure was weak. Then some said the water looked strange. Others said it had an odd taste. And in an old hotel in the middle of a busy city, problems like that happen. Pipes get old, tanks need repairs, maintenance gets called. So on the morning of February 19, 2013, a hotel worker made his way up to the roof to check the large water tank sitting above the building. From the street below, no one would have thought anything unusual was happening. Cars moved through downtown Los Angeles. People walked past the hotel. Guests were still inside their rooms. Showers had been running. Sinks had been turned on. Toilets had been flushed. But high above all of that, on the roof of the Cecil Hotel, the worker climbed up to inspect one of the tanks. And when he looked inside, he found the answer to a mystery police had been chasing for nearly 3 weeks. Inside the water tank was the body of 21-year-old Elisa Lam, a young woman who had checked into the hotel alone, a young woman who had vanished without warning, and a young woman whose last known moments were captured on an elevator camera, in footage so strange, so unsettling, and so hard to explain that millions of people would watch it and ask the same question. What happened to Elisa Lam inside the Cecil Hotel?
This is one of those stories where the facts already sound impossible. A young traveler disappears from a hotel. Police search for her. Her face is shared with the public. Then the last video of her alive is released, and instead of clearing things up, it makes the case even more confusing. In the footage, Elisa is seen stepping into an elevator. She presses several buttons. She waits. But the doors do not close. Then she leans out into the hallway, almost like she is looking for someone. She steps back inside. She moves into the corner. Then she steps out again, making gestures with her hands that people would later replay, slow down, analyze, and argue about over and over again. Some people thought she was hiding. Some thought someone was just outside the camera's view. Some thought the footage had been edited. And because this happened inside the Cecil Hotel, a building already known for its dark history, the internet turned Elisa's disappearance into something bigger, stranger, and more sinister than anyone expected. But underneath all the theories, all the rumors, and all the speculation, there was still a real person at the center of it. Her name was Elisa Lam, and this is her story.
Welcome back to Echoes and Oddities. I'm Ivy Monroe, and today's episode is one of our podcast-style stories, a more stripped-back version of the strange, eerie, and forgotten cases we cover here. So if you're listening, you can just settle in and let the story unfold. And if you're watching on YouTube, this episode may only have one main visual on screen. But every week, I also share fully illustrated stories with eerie artwork, real photos, and visuals that help bring these mysteries to life. Here on Echoes and Oddities, we look at the strange side of history, unsolved mysteries, forgotten tragedies, and the stories that stay with you long after they're over. So with that said, let's go back to January of 2013, inside one of the most infamous hotels in Los Angeles. To understand why this case stayed with people for so long, we have to go back before the elevator footage, before the theories, before the water tank, before millions of strangers on the internet tried to solve a mystery they could only see in fragments. Because Elisa Lam was not just a name attached to a viral video. She was a 21-year-old student from Vancouver, British Columbia. She was young, curious, and doing what a lot of young people dream about doing at that age: traveling, exploring, trying to see more of the world outside the place she came from. In January of 2013, Elisa took a trip down the West Coast. She visited different cities in California, and eventually, her travels brought her to Los Angeles. And while Los Angeles is known for sunshine, beaches, palm trees, and Hollywood dreams,
That is not exactly the version of Los Angeles Elisa walked into when she checked into the Cecil Hotel. The Cecil sat in downtown LA, near Skid Row, in a part of the city where beauty and hardship could exist on the same block. One street might have old architecture and neon signs. The next might have people sleeping outside, sirens in the distance, and the kind of energy that makes you keep looking over your shoulder, even when nothing has happened yet. And the Cecil itself had a reputation. It was old. It was massive. It had long hallways, hundreds of rooms, elevators that felt frozen in another time, and a history that people whispered about long before Elisa Lam ever arrived. By 2013, part of the building had been rebranded as Stay on Main, almost like the hotel was trying to separate itself from its own past. A new name, a cleaner image, a fresh face for travelers who were looking for somewhere cheap to stay in the middle of Los Angeles. But even with a new name, the building was still the Cecil. And on January 26, 2013, Elisa Lam checked in. At first, nothing about her stay seemed like the beginning of a mystery. She was a traveler. She was staying in a budget hotel. She was supposed to keep moving. Her plans were to eventually head toward Santa Cruz. And like many people traveling alone, she stayed in touch with her family. That detail matters, because when someone is traveling by themselves, those regular check-ins become a lifeline. A phone call, a message, a simple sign that says, "I'm okay." But a few days after Elisa checked into the Cecil Hotel, those check-ins stopped. And that is when a normal trip started turning into something else entirely. The Cecil Hotel was the kind of place that could look different depending on who was looking at it. To some people, it was just a cheap place to sleep in downtown Los Angeles, a budget hotel, a stopover, somewhere to put your bags down for a few nights before moving on to the next city. And for travelers who did not know much about Los Angeles, the Cecil may have looked like a good deal. It was historic, it was close to public transportation, it had that old city feeling people sometimes romanticize when they are visiting a place for the first time. But the Cecil also had another face, the one locals knew, the one that did not always show up clearly in booking photos. The Cecil sat near Skid Row, in a part of downtown Los Angeles where people were struggling openly. Homelessness, addiction, poverty, crime, and mental illness were not hidden behind closed doors there. They were right outside, woven into the streets around the building. And then there was the hotel's own history. Long before Elisa Lam ever checked in, the Cecil had already become known for tragedy. There had been suicides, violence, deaths, people who came there during some of the lowest moments of their lives. And over time, the building became one of those places where the stories stacked on top of each other. One tragedy became two, two became 10. And eventually, the hotel itself started to feel like a character in every story told about it. By 2013, the Cecil was trying to move away from that reputation. Part of the hotel had been rebranded as Stay on Main, which sounded brighter, cleaner, and safer. The kind of name that made it feel less like the Cecil Hotel and more like a normal budget stay for young travelers. But the rebrand could only change so much, because inside, it was still the same building. The same old elevators, the same long hallways, the same roof, the same water tanks sitting above everyone's heads. And that is one of the unsettling things about this story. Elisa Lam did not check into some abandoned building in the middle of nowhere. She did not vanish on a dark road where nobody could see her. She disappeared inside a functioning hotel, a place full of guests, workers, cameras, rooms, locks, stairwells, elevators, people coming in and out every day. And somehow, in the middle of all of that, Elisa vanished. At first, it did not look like one of those mysteries that would take over the internet.
It looked like a missing person case. A young woman traveling alone had stopped contacting her family. She had not checked out when she was supposed to, and the people who loved her were scared. Her family reached out when they could not get in touch with her, and police began trying to trace her final known movements. They checked the hotel. They searched areas they could access. They asked questions. They looked for signs that Elisa had left the building. But the Cecil was not an easy place to search. It was huge. It had multiple floors, multiple exits, shared spaces, private rooms, staff-only areas, a roof, and hundreds of places where a person could be seen 1 minute and gone the next. Then police found something that seemed like it should help: security footage. A camera inside one of the Cecil Hotel elevators had captured Elisa Lam on the night she disappeared. And when that footage was released to the public, it did not calm people down. It did the opposite. Because the last known footage of Elisa Lam alive did not feel like an answer. It felt like the beginning of a much bigger mystery. When police released the elevator footage, they were hoping someone would recognize Elisa. Maybe someone had seen her that day. Maybe someone knew where she went after leaving the elevator. Maybe the video would give investigators one small piece of information they were missing. But what happened instead was something no one could have predicted. The video spread everywhere. And the more people watched it, the more questions they had. The footage itself was quiet. There was no sound, no dramatic music, no voice. Just a hotel elevator camera looking down from above, showing Elisa Lam in the final known moments before she vanished. At first, she steps into the elevator like anyone would. She moves toward the panel and presses several buttons. Then she steps back and waits. But the doors do not close. A few seconds pass. Then a few more. Still, the doors stay open. And that is the first thing that makes the video feel strange. Because elevators are supposed to move. You get in, you press the button, the doors close. But in this footage, Elisa is standing there, waiting, and nothing is happening. Then she leans forward and looks out into the hallway. She looks to one side, then the other. And for a moment, it feels like she is checking to see if someone is there. She steps back into the elevator, then moves into the corner, pressing herself close to the wall, almost like she does not want to be seen from the hallway. And when you watch it, even if you are trying to stay logical, your mind starts filling in the empty space. Was someone outside the elevator? Was she afraid? Was she hiding? Was she playing around? Was she confused? Was she trying to get the doors to close? Then Elisa steps back out. She moves into the hallway, but the camera can only see part of her. Her body slips in and out of frame. Her hands begin moving in a way that people would later replay again and again. She gestures outward. She bends her wrists. She moves her arms like she is talking to someone we cannot see, or maybe reacting to something only she understands. And because there is no audio, no wider camera angle, and no clear explanation, the video becomes the kind of thing that makes people uncomfortable. Not because it proves anything, but because it leaves too much room for imagination. Then Elisa walks away. The elevator doors finally close, and the video ends. For most missing person cases, security footage can help narrow things down. It can show where someone went, who they were with, what direction they walked, whether they seemed calm, scared, injured, or followed. But with Elisa, the footage did not give people closure. It gave them a puzzle. And once that puzzle reached the internet, everyone wanted to be the person who solved it. People slowed the footage down. They zoomed in. They brightened the shadows. They watched her hands. They watched the hallway. They counted the seconds between the doors opening and closing. They argued about whether the timestamp looked strange.
Some people believed she was hiding from someone. Some believed the elevator had been tampered with. Some wondered if someone was standing just outside the camera's view. Others focused on the ways she moved and suggested she might have been experiencing some kind of mental health episode. And then, because this happened at the Cecil Hotel, the story became even bigger. People connected Elisa's disappearance to the hotel's reputation. They brought up the building's past. They talked about every dark story attached to those walls. And suddenly, Elisa Lam was not just a missing person. She was becoming a viral mystery, a symbol, a theory, a video people watched late at night and sent to their friends with one question: what do you think is happening here? But while strangers online were debating the footage, Elisa's family was living through something very different. They were not watching a creepy internet mystery. They were waiting for their daughter to come home. They were hoping someone had seen her. They were hoping the footage would lead to answers. And for nearly 3 weeks, there were none. No confirmed sighting after the elevator. No clear sign that she had left the hotel. No explanation for where she had gone. Just an old building in downtown Los Angeles, a missing young woman, and a video that seemed to get more unsettling every time someone watched it.
Before we move forward, I want to show the actual elevator footage. For these podcast-style episodes, I usually keep the focus on the storytelling, so you can listen while you're working, cleaning, driving, or just going about your day. But in Elisa Lam's case, the footage is such a major part of the story that I think it's important to include it here. This is the video released during the search for Elisa, and it is the footage that caused so many people to question what was happening in her final known moments. There is no audio. There is no clear answer in the video. Just Elisa, inside the elevator at the Cecil Hotel, behaving in a way that many people found strange, confusing, and deeply unsettling. So as you watch it, pay attention to the elevator doors, the buttons, the hallway, and the way Elisa moves in and out of frame. Because after this footage was released, the case stopped being just a missing person investigation in the public's mind and became one of the most discussed mysteries on the internet. Here is the actual elevator footage.
And that was the footage that changed everything. For investigators, it was meant to help find Elisa, but for the public, it became something else entirely. People watched it over and over again, trying to find clues in every movement, every pause, every second the elevator doors stayed open. And from there, the theories only grew. After the elevator footage was released, the case started spreading far beyond Los Angeles. At first, police were looking for help. That was the purpose of releasing the video. They needed someone to recognize Elisa, someone who had seen her in the hotel, someone who had spoken to her, someone who might have remembered seeing a young woman walking near the Cecil or getting on a bus or leaving downtown Los Angeles. Because at that point, there was still hope. Hope that Elisa had walked out of the hotel. Hope that she had gotten confused. Hope that she had gone somewhere without telling anyone. Hope that she was still alive and just needed to be found. But the problem was, nothing was lining up in a way that made people feel certain. Elisa's belongings were still at the hotel. Her family had not heard from her. There was no confirmed sighting of her after the elevator footage. And inside the Cecil Hotel, investigators were dealing with a building that was not simple to search. This was not a small roadside motel with one hallway and a parking lot. The Cecil was large. It had multiple floors, long corridors, rooms filled with guests, staff-only spaces, a lobby, stairwells, elevators, a roof, and years of old architecture that made the building feel almost like a maze. Police searched the hotel. They used dogs, they looked through the areas they could access, but still, Elisa was not found. And that is one of the details that makes this case so frustrating. Because later, once people learned where Elisa had been discovered, many asked the same question. How could she have been there the whole time? How could a young woman disappear inside a hotel while people were still checking in and out, while guests were sleeping in rooms below, while staff were walking the halls, while police were searching, and no one found her? But at the time, investigators did not know that the answer was above them. Literally above them. On the roof of the Cecil Hotel. Above the guest rooms. Above the hallways. Above the lobby where people were still coming and going. There were 4 large water tanks, and inside one of them was Elisa. But no one knew that yet. So the days passed. Her family waited. Police kept looking. The internet kept watching the elevator footage. And the Cecil Hotel kept operating. Guests were still staying there. People were still turning on the taps, still brushing their teeth, still taking showers, still assuming the water coming through the pipes was just water. Until one day, the complaints started. Some guests said the water pressure was weak. Some noticed the color seemed off. Others said the water had a strange taste. And at first, this may have sounded like a plumbing issue. Old hotel, old pipes, a problem with the tanks, something maintenance could fix. So on February 19, 2013, a hotel maintenance worker went up to the roof. He climbed toward the large water tanks that supplied water to the building. And when he checked one of them, everything changed. Because after nearly 3 weeks of searching, Elisa Lam had finally been found. Not outside the hotel, not in another city, not walking somewhere alone, but inside the Cecil Hotel itself. In a place most guests would never see. A place above their heads. A place connected to the water they had been using. And from that moment on, the case was no longer just about a missing woman. It became about how she got there, how she accessed the roof, how she ended up inside the tank, and whether the strange elevator footage was a clue or just one of the final glimpses of a young woman in distress. Once Elisa was found, the case changed. Before that, people were asking where she went after the elevator footage. But now, the question became something much harder to understand. How did Elisa Lam end up on the roof of the Cecil Hotel, inside a water tank, in a place most guests were never supposed to access?
That was the part people could not let go of. Because on paper, the answer sounded simple. Elisa had been missing, she had been found, the search was over. But emotionally, nothing about it felt simple. People wanted to know how she reached the roof. They wanted to know whether the doors were locked. They wanted to know if alarms should have gone off. They wanted to know if someone else could have been with her. And they wanted to know whether the elevator footage was showing a young woman in danger or a young woman already in the middle of a mental health crisis. That is where the theories began to grow. Some people believed she was being followed. Some believed someone was just outside the camera's view. Some believed the footage had been edited or slowed down. Others believed the explanation was not supernatural or criminal at all, but tragic. That Elisa may have been confused, disoriented, or experiencing symptoms connected to her mental health. And I think that is what makes this case so difficult. Because the footage is unsettling. The location is unsettling. The way she was found is unsettling. But unsettling does not always mean someone else was involved. Sometimes it means we are looking at the final moments of a person in distress. And because we do not have every answer, our minds try to create one. And with Elisa's case, the internet did exactly that. It turned every second into a clue, every movement into a theory, every gap in the timeline into something suspicious. But eventually, investigators and the coroner had to look at the evidence they actually had. Not the rumors, not the hotel's reputation, not the fear around the video, the evidence. And the official finding was that Elisa Lam died by accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing factor. There were no findings that clearly proved someone had attacked her, no clear evidence in the official conclusion that this was a homicide. And for some people, that answer brought closure. For others, it only created more questions. Because even if the death was accidental, people still struggled to understand how a young woman could vanish inside a functioning hotel, remain missing for almost 3 weeks, and be found in a place that seemed so hard to reach. And honestly, I understand why people still feel uneasy about it. Not because I think this has to be some huge conspiracy, but because some tragedies leave behind details that are hard for the mind to accept. And Elisa Lam's case is one of them. And that is where this case still sits for a lot of people. Some accept the official finding. Some believe there are still too many unanswered questions. And some people fall somewhere in the middle, understanding that Elisa's death may have been accidental, while still feeling uneasy about the way everything happened. And honestly, I understand that. Because this is not one of those stories where the ending feels clean. It does not feel simple. A young woman traveled to Los Angeles alone. She checked into a hotel with a long and troubled history. She was last seen in elevator footage that looked strange enough to stop people in their tracks. And then, after nearly 3 weeks of searching, she was found in a place no one expected, above the hotel, inside a rooftop water tank. So even if the official answer is accidental drowning, it still leaves people with that uncomfortable feeling. That feeling that there are parts of the story we will never fully see. Not because there has to be some massive conspiracy, not because the Cecil Hotel has to be haunted, not because every strange detail means someone is hiding the truth, but because real life is sometimes messy in a way that stories are not. Real tragedies do not always leave behind perfect answers. Sometimes there is no final scene where everything makes sense. Sometimes there is only evidence, grief, confusion, and a family left with a loss no theory could ever fix. And I think that is what gets lost when people talk about Elisa Lam. Her case became famous because of the elevator footage, because of the hotel, because of the water tank, because of how strange all of it sounded when you put the details together. But Elisa was not just the girl in the elevator. She was not just a mystery people could pause, rewind, and analyze. She was a real person, a daughter, a student, a young woman who had barely begun her adult life. And while it is natural to have questions, I also think it matters how we ask them. Because curiosity should not erase compassion, and mystery should not erase the person at the center of it. So when I look at this case, my personal feeling is this. I do not think we need ghost stories to make it unsettling. I do not think we need to turn Elisa's final moments into something supernatural for this story to stay with us. The facts are already haunting enough. A woman vanished in a hotel full of people. A video showed her acting in a way no one could fully explain. And when she was finally found, the answer was both tragic and difficult to accept. Maybe the official explanation is exactly what happened. Maybe there are details we will never know. So when I look at this case, my personal feeling is this. I do not think we need ghost stories to make it unsettling. I do not think we need to turn Elisa's final moments into something supernatural for this story to stay with us. The facts are already haunting enough. A woman vanished in a hotel full of people. A video showed her acting in a way no one could fully explain. And when she was finally found, the answer was both tragic and difficult to accept. Maybe the official explanation is exactly what happened. Maybe there are details we will never know. But either way, Elisa Lam deserved to be remembered as more than a viral mystery. She deserved to be remembered as a person. And that is where I want to leave this story. Not with fear, not with rumors, but with the reminder that behind every strange case, there is someone who mattered. So now I want to know what you think. Do you believe the official explanation makes sense? Or do you still think there are unanswered questions in Elisa Lam's case? Let me know below. If you found this story interesting, make sure you're following or subscribe to Echoes and Oddities on YouTube and Spotify. These podcast-style episodes are a little more stripped back so you can listen while you're going through your day. But every week, I also share illustrated stories with eerie artwork, real photos, and visuals that help bring these strange cases to life. Thank you for listening. This is Ivy Monroe, and I'll see you in the next strange story.